Hey guys, this is Khavrion, and I'm here with another battle report. This is for IGL Season 7, Round 4, me as Steel Phalanx versus Jmustang as Vanilla Ariadna, in a game of Cryogenics. This is a new mission as of ITS 14, but it is very clearly based on the Dire Foes mission from Obsidian Head. In Cryogenics, there are 4 tech coffins in the center of the 4 quadrants that separate the midfield, basically at the same spot as the consoles in Supremacy. Distributed in these 4 tech coffins are the 2 HVTs, yours and your opponent's. You open a tech coffin by pushing a button, and when you do, there is a chance that there's an HVT inside. It starts at 40%, but there always has to be 2 HVTs, so if you get down to the wire and there just aren't any tech coffins left, the HVT pops out automatically. The lion's share of the points in this mission come from either dominating the quadrants with the HVTs at the end of the game, or threatening the HVTs, ideally with your special data tracker that they've called the Master Breacher. There are a handful of other points. Pushing at least 2 buttons is worth 2 points. Dominating the quadrant in which your Master Breacher, a special data tracker, is located is worth 1 point per round, and then there is a classified. Still, the objectives that you're going to clash with your opponent over are going to be the HVT objectives. And because the wording of these points is a little confusing, I'll break it down right now. At the end of the game, for each HVT, there are a couple of ways you can get points. First, if you dominate the quadrant that contains the HVT, that's worth 2 points. Second, if you don't dominate the quadrant, there's still 2 points you could get from that HVT, one of which is by threatening it, the second of which is by threatening it with your Master Breacher. And in this case, threaten simply means have a non-null trooper in zone of control of the HVT. Thus, there are 2 points associated with each HVT at the end of the game. There are 2 HVTs. That means there are 4 potential points, with the 6 other points spread out with the other objectives. All told, I feel that Cryogenics is actually pretty distinct from the missions that we have in ITS 14. It's got some button pushing, which is kind of like Supremacy. It's got some scoring of the quadrants, kind of like Supremacy. But the uncertainty and randomness of which quadrant contains the HVT, coupled with the various ways to score points even if you don't dominate the quadrant containing the HVT, makes this mission feel, on paper, fairly different from both quadrant control and Supremacy. That said, so many of the points, especially those points that you're going to steal from your opponent, happen at the end of game rounds or the end of the game, which is why I feel Cryogenics encourages the non-interactive go second, hunker down, then win the game on turn 3 that is also present in Quadrant Control and Supremacy. I don't love missions that encourage that kind of gameplay, but Cryogenics is hardly unique in doing that, so I won't hold it against Cryogenics too much. One last thing that I will remark is that tech coffins go away when you push the button. What that means is that if your opponent manages to push 3 buttons before you've pushed 2, then there won't be any tech coffins left on the board for you to push, and therefore you cannot possibly get the 2 points for having activated 2 or more tech coffins. This has led some people to suggest that the mission actually favors going first and then running around and pushing 3 buttons before your opponent gets a chance to do anything. Me personally, I don't think that's a good idea. I definitely agree that if you go first and have nothing better to do, then sure, you can steal 2 points from your opponent. But I worry that those orders would have been much better spent trying to attack the person who's now going second, because if that player has the last turn of the game and their army is still intact, it shouldn't be too hard for them to steal all of the HVT points away from you, killing your Master Breacher, and then winning the game that way. Likewise, some people have suggested that if you're going first, then you absolutely have to push at least 2 buttons for fear that your opponent will take 3 of them away from you. They further suggest that this is good design because it blunts the need to alpha strike from the first player. Again, I don't agree. Because the person who gets to go last has such potential to disrupt the HVT scoring, I think that the player going first cannot afford to spend any orders doing anything other than killing the opposition. Whereas if you're going second and get that last turn, you'd be much better served trying to survive and counterattack and make it till that turn 3 rather than wasting time pushing buttons. In fact, in one practice game that I got to play, which coincidentally was against Queen's Gambit ended up going second. On his first turn, he pushed 3 buttons. And while that did deny me 2 points, it didn't kill that many of my troopers, and I was thus able to massacre the rest of his army on my turn 2, and by turn 3 score everything off the HVTs. Thus, based on my theorycraft perspective and my limited practice, I went into this game feeling like it was going to be a major kill fest with a high priority on breaking the back of the army of whoever goes second. Having now played this mission in a tournament context against Jmustang, who defended himself very, very well, I 100% still feel like this is true. Cryogenics favors the person who has the last turn, and that means that if you're going first, this is very much a kill mission. On which note, let's go ahead and look at the lists. I have once again decided to run the why not have a GML bot in Group 2. This means that for all 4 rounds of IGL, I have run this list, and I have to say it has held up quite well. My other list was the Spitfire Hector version of Big Boys, and I think that Big Boys would have done pretty well in the matchup against Ariadna. Even so, I've been trying to try this list out, and because I played it in all 3 rounds, I actually have more experience playing this list recently than I do with that other version of Big Boys, so I decided, why not, I'll go with this one. To take you through it nice and quick, this is essentially a variation on a 2 Enomatarchos Big Boy list. In your first fire team, you have the Big Boy Enomatarchos minus Akmon, you have Ajax, Machaon, Phoenix, and a Myrmidon. The 3 heroes are all fantastic. Ajax is a giant sack of wounds and armor that's super dangerous up close. Phoenix is a mind-numbingly oppressive ARO piece, and Machaon is both a doctor and very survivable himself. And against Ariadna, even the Myrmidon is pretty good. While he is only 1 wound, that Mimetism -6 and the ability to toss linked smoke will keep him fairly safe against any Ariadnan shooters except the Unknown Ranger. Moreover, his combination of 4-inch dodge distance and nanopulsars means that he can potentially threaten a bear if it tries to get too close. I'm not generally keen on Myrmidons all that much, but in this list I think he does pretty well. In the second Enomatarchos, I have Akmon, Oideros, the Myrmidon officer, and Pandora. Akmon is a 2-wound TAC-aware engineer, which is fantastic. Oideros is kind of like a hero version of a Myrmidon Spitfire. He has a Mark 12 2 structure, which is kind of odd, Eclipse grenades, and of course a decent stat line. The Myrmidon officer is basically in there for chain of command, but I've been finding that the boarding shotgun is actually nice as I run around the corner link type guy. And of course the combination of Eclipse and 2 wounds and link ability and Mimetism -6 is going to make him a nightmare for poor Ariadna to deal with. Lastly, we have Pandora. Pandora is, I think, the most interesting addition to Steel Phalanx in Blackwind. She is a wildcard NWI hacker with a pitcher, and the big idea of the GLML bot in this list is that I will use the link to move Pandora up, I will throw pitchers at burst 2 with Pandora, and then I will move Spotlight with the whole link, thus doing the guided missile thing with a little bit more efficiency. This game actually presents a golden opportunity for me to do exactly that thing. And despite realizing that the storm is more or less perfect, I actually do not use Pandora to do the guided missile strike, which I'll talk about when I get there, but the important thing to remember is that it's something I can do. Other than that, I've basically got bots and flash pulses. We have the missile launcher bot and the pro bot, which is a baggage bot to refill Pandora's pitchers. And then in group 2, I have a Warcore and then 2 Lamids. These Lamids are going to basically just be mimetic flash pulses, and they actually get a fair bit done. My buddy Gyro remarked that the Lamids may actually be the best model in infiNity for the cost. And while I wouldn't go that far, I love their power in ARO as a flash pulse. In this list in particular, because the Lamids are in Group 2, I can be much more aggressive about using them as ARO pieces because I don't really care if they get knocked unconscious. And that sums up my list. Here is, I think, my opponent's list. He is running a 2-bear vanilla Ariadna list, and for the most part, he's got all the all-stars that I would expect from a vanilla Ariadna list. You have the Impetuous Bear, you have the non-Impetuous Bear and Controller, you have the Unknown Ranger, you have a Liberto, you have an Infiltrating Grunt. I don't know how common this guy is, but he is really good, so it's not bad to see him. You have 2 Chasseurs, and then you have the Specialist version of Usha. These guys are all really, really good, so I don't begrudge any of them their presence. I am less certain of the troopers in Group 2. Starting from the bottom, we have a Paracommando AP Spitfire. This is a BS-12 mimetic AP Spitfire, and none of that is bad. But with the 15-unit cap imposed by Tactical Window, I found it's just too easy to spot gaps in your opponent's list. And having spotted the gap, it's not that hard to watch my deployment zone edges and the edges of the map with stuff like flash pulses. Next up are the Volunteer and the Line Kazakh Obvious Lieutenant. Both of these are cheap cheerleaders. The only thing to remark is that the Line Kazakh is an obvious lieutenant. There is no other lieutenant option on the board. Because it's so obvious, I end up being really tempted to try to guided missile strike his Line Kazakh and put him in loss of lieutenant. That's not something I do, and the Volunteer does threaten me mid-game, but I can't help but feel like it would have been worth finding 3 points to have a lieutenant decoy. Next up is the Scotsguard FO Shock Marksman Rifle. I have legitimately never seen this guy on the table. But seeing him on the board, seeing how Jmustang played him, I do think he has some appeal. He is a BS-13 NCO specialist with mimetism and a decent enough gun. Moreover, because he has total terrain, he'll actually have 5-4 movement in this mission. This adds up to make him a fairly competent all-arounder who can move, push buttons, shoot, and is an NCO to boot. In our particular game, Jmustang puts him in suppressive fire, and I just don't feel like messing with that. It's not hard to throw smoke on him, but it's not like he was using the lieutenant order for anything else. That said, this guy is an expensive 1-wound model. So while I was surprised to see this guy because he's so rare, I think there are good reasons why he is a rare pick. The Metro Paramedic, on the other hand, seemed good enough. Jmustang remarked that he's cheap, he has total terrain for the extra movement, and he gets 2 dice and a +3 to push buttons in this mission. All he does is run up and push a button, but what more does he need to do? Honestly, the only anti-synergy that I would remark on is if you have the Metro Paramedic and you have the Scotsguard FTO, you're not going to use both of those guys to push buttons. Consequently, if you trust the Scotsguard FTO, then I think you'd be better served turning this Metro into a Line Kazakh Lieutenant decoy. Last up is the Foxtrot Sniper. At 20 points and half an SWC, this guy is fairly cheap, and Jmustang uses him essentially as a mimetic Delamy. His job is to be annoying to discover and annoying to remove once he is discovered. Sadly, I think the Delamy comparison is telling. At 20 points, this guy is nowhere near as cheap as the Delamy, and while the sniper rifle has better range bands than the Panzerfaust, it simply isn't dangerous enough to actually make me scared. My army is full of multi-wound, highly mimetic troopers, so unless he's shooting at Pandora or the Myrmidon officer who are shock vulnerable, I really just don't care about the sniper rifle. That is, of course, partly a privilege of being Steel Phalanx, but it is also a criticism of the Foxtrot. One other thing I will say is that it might be worth considering the Foxtrot Forward Observer in the infiltrating ARO role. The Flash Pulse doesn't have the range bands of the sniper rifle, but it gets to use your whip, which is higher, it forces 2 saves rather than 1, and if you stun something, that might be actually way more annoying than imposing a wound on a multi-wound trooper. Not only that, if you decide you don't want to use the Foxtrot FO as a ARO piece, you can still use him as a midfield specialist. Obviously, this is a pretty half-baked comparison, but it's something that I've been chewing on in the context of hidden deployment snipers versus hidden deployment flash pulse troopers, and maybe it's something that's useful in the Foxtrot case too. Anyway, one final remark on this analysis. I am not an Ariadna player, and Jmustang has demonstrated that he very much is a competent one. So, while a lot of these inclusions might seem surprising to me, that definitely does not mean they're bad choices in this list, and they may not even be bad choices in general. That wraps up discussing each profile in the list. I do want to say 2 more things. First, when I see a 2 Bearpode list, I am used to seeing the 2 Bearpodes in 2 separate groups. The Group 2 Bearpode, usually the impetuous one, throws a lot of smoke to cover the first Bearpode's advance, and then the first Bearpode can attack without having to spend too many orders throwing his own smoke. The second thing I'd like to remark is that while I'm not certain of all the profiles in this list, I'm not an Ariadna player, and Jmustang is. He's evidently a pretty darn good Ariadna player to get as far as he has. And that is worth keeping in mind. In particular, let's keep that in mind as we talk about Jmustang's deployment. He won the die roll and chose deployment, and after agonizing for a bit, I decided it was better to go first. I've already talked about Jmustang's deployment in the null deployment video, but if you haven't seen that one, let me summarize by saying that Jmustang has a very solid, very defensive null deployment. Taking you through it, he has a Grunt, Bearpode, and Metro over here. All those template weapons are watching those close ranges. This is the Scotsguard. This is the Line Kazakh in a very, very unassailable position. Not only is he on a building, if I do get on the building, I'll still have to walk all the way around this annoying piece of terrain. So it'll be really hard for me to get direct line of fire or CC on this Line Kazakh. Same is true for this Polaris Bearpode controller who's there. This is the other bear. I think this is the heavy shotgun bear. Unknown Ranger, Volunteer, Chasseur, Mine, Liberto, Mine, Chasseur. I don't remember where the other mine is. Maybe it's like down here or something. And then we have the Foxtrot Sniper, which was his withheld piece, and then Usha. Actually, Usha might have been the withheld piece, now that I think about it. Not seen on this board is the AP Spitfire Paracommando. And as I highlighted in the null deployment video, this is a very solid defensive position. Aside from the Foxtrot, who is on ARO, and the Chasseur, who I can get line of fire on by climbing on buildings of my own, everyone is positioned to make it really hard for me to get line of fire. You obviously have the Lieutenant and the Bearpode Controller here in very defensive positions. The Scots Guard is less defended because he's not on a building, but still pretty safe. Unknown Ranger is as far away as you can get. And then everyone else, while they do have slightly larger lines of fire, is doing things like watching zones with chain rifles or flamethrowers, and thus is hard for me to get at. If I come this way, for example, I'll have to deal with the Grunt first, then the Bear, then the Metro. And if I come this way, I will have to deal with, there's this mine. This Bearpode will be able to throw smoke, and I've got chain rifles to deal with over there as well. In case it isn't obvious, this Chasseur is actually also standing up, so if I do manage to come around this way, it's possible that he can start either flamethrowering me or shooting me with his rifle, and that'll be annoying too. The other thing that makes this defensive position really good is that he has distributed his value. If I get over here and kill the Bearpode, Grunt, and the Metro, I will not be able to threaten the Unknown Ranger and the Bearpode, and I have a risk of being rather exposed to his counterattack myself. Likewise, if I take this open space and drop a pitcher, say, here or here, and then guided missile strike either the obvious Lieutenant or the Unknown Ranger, then I won't really have any other good targets within repeater range to hack. Further, to get access to anything, I'll have to come through this wall of mines and chasseurs and libertos, all of whom are annoying to deal with and potentially order-consuming to do so safely. Even Usha, who is deployed very far forward, is actually in a position that is very awkward for me to get line of fire on, and if I do, I will certainly be in template range for her boarding shotgun. Further, if I do spend orders dealing with Usha, I'll have to spend orders walking up into the comparatively empty this half of the board, rather than going to the more target-rich environment over here. So this whole thing ends up being very defensive, but is deployed aggressively enough that on his turn 1, he will still be able to attack with pieces like the Bearpode, or this Bearpode, or Usha, unless I have dealt with them. This is a very solid A+ null deployment. That said, being a null deployment, it has two vulnerabilities. First, a fast attack piece like a Sphinx or Achilles would be able to run up unopposed. I don't have any of those, so that's not too much of a problem. Second, there is very little stopping me from running Pandora into, say, this position, and then throwing a pitcher right here and guided missile striking his obvious Lieutenant. As an alternative, I could do the same thing but run Pandora over to, let's say here, throwing a pitcher in this position, and then guided missile striking his Unknown Ranger, who is also his Master Breacher. Either of these attacks would have been real damaging to his game plan if I had chosen to pursue them. So keep that in mind when I get to my turn 1. Meanwhile, here is my deployment. I have Oideros, Pandora, Akmon, and the Myrmidon officer here, a Lambent Flashpulse bot, Missile Launcher bot, Repeater Baggage bot, another Flashpulse bot over there, and then I have the big boy at Novatarkos with Machaon, Phoenix, Ajax, and a conventional Myrmidon, and then I have a Warcore. My deployment is actually fairly defensive if you look at it, and this is because I don't know, as I am deploying, which of the Anomatarkos I'm going to attack with. I'm pretty sure it will be these guys, which is why I've put Oideros front and center, but you never know. This is especially true if I want to make a play for the Unknown Ranger, because if I'm going after the Unknown Ranger, I'd really like to do so with Ajax rather than Oideros. Ajax is himself a natural-born warrior, he's got higher burst and higher damage, and of course he can berserk the Unknown Ranger if worst comes to worst. So I don't want to have to spend any orders repositioning myself defensively, which is why I've chosen to put both of my squads in a fairly defensive position to start with. The only piece I withhold is Phoenix, and the reasoning there is because he is a defensive piece, I want to be able to put him in the right spot to defend in case I want to attack with the other team. You'll also notice, I hope, that this deployment has done a bad job of watching my back deployment zone. Once my opponent has put down his list, I spot the gap and immediately start worrying about Van Zant. Van Zant's not in the list, you've already seen it, but I could have allayed a lot of those concerns by doing things like having this Flashpulse bot watching correctly, or having this Missile Launcher bot, in a slightly different position in order to watch the back line.
It's not a huge mistake, but it's just a small thing to keep in mind. And with that discussion of my deployment done, we can smoothly transition into a discussion of my first turn. I've got a tough choice in front of me. One, I know that Cryogenics has a lot riding on the last turn of the game, and if I want to have a shot at winning, I will need to have broken the back of his army long before we get there. Two, the two Bearpods and the Unknown Ranger are quite dangerous. The Bearpods pose less of a threat to Steel Phalanx than most armies. We can tie them up in CC, we can throw smoke to disrupt their berserk, and we have lots of nanopulsars, and with Pandora, viral. Still, even a Steel Phalanx player disregards a bear at their own risk, and the only way that I'm going to feel safe being in the midfield is if I can put him in Lost Lieutenant off of this line Kazakh. Third, my opponent, as we've already discussed, is deployed very defensively. There simply is not a heck of a lot that I can go out there and kill. I could kill Usha, I could kill this Foxtrot Sniper, I don't know that it's a Foxtrot, but I'm pretty sure, and I could kill this Chasseur, but otherwise, that's about it. If I wanted to throw caution to the wind, I suppose I could kill all three of these guys and then camp out on this building, but if I did that, I'd probably use the Machaon and Nomatarkos, and he is both my Lieutenant and my Master Breacher. These three competing principles make my first turn a difficult dilemma. The most obvious play is, in fact, to take this link, to run into the midfield, to try to push some buttons, kill the Liberto, kill the Sniper, and then kill the line Kazakh and set up in a defensive midfield position. If that works, it'll be great. But as the Spartans supposedly said to the Persians, if. I've got two big concerns. First, there's about a 5% chance that Pandora fails both of her pitcher tosses, and if that happens, then the whole plan is shot. Second, while the idea is that I will move Spotlight, the orders that are best suited for move spotlighting are the ones that I have to do in order to get there in the first place. Once I get Pandora to this position, there will be targets that I can shoot at with Oideros. Maybe this Liberto, maybe this Chasseur behind this thing, maybe someone else. The point is, by the time I get up here, I don't actually want to be move spotlighting, I want to be move shooting. And I think this explains in one single example why I haven't found Pandora to be as good at spotlight hacking as I initially expected. Pandora's pitcher is a 16-inch thing, and while it does have an extra 8-inch zone of control, that still only makes it be 24 inches. And 24 inches is basically the same range as Oideros' gun. Thus, by the time Pandora wants to be move spotlighting, Oideros wants to be move shooting. I think what that means is that if you're going to be move spotlighting, it's mostly going to be move spotlighting back away from the front line rather than some other movement that you'd like to have done anyway. Which might explain why I haven't had that much luck with Pandora move spotlighting and then guided missile striking things. Obviously, I don't know if that's the right explanation, but it remains true that I ran a list specifically intended on guided missile striking things with Pandora, and I haven't done it even once in 4 games of infiNity. The same principle basically applies to the Unknown Ranger, by the way. It's just that I would have had to spend even more orders running up before I could start throwing pitchers, and I wouldn't actually put him in Lost Lieutenant, so the defensive advantage would be lost there as well. What I instead decide to do is take the few targets that are available and kill them, then camp out in a very defensive position of my own. I first take this Nomatarkos. The plan is to run it up to the midfield, get Machaon right here, which is just barely in the quadrant, and be ready for the storm. In that process, I want to kill this Chasseur, and I actually bait the Foxtrot into taking an unopposed shot on Phoenix. Phoenix is not the link leader, Machaon is, but my opponent misses the shot, which isn't super likely, and the Foxtrot is revealed. I am then later able to stand Phoenix on the top of this building and just absolutely annihilate the Foxtrot. That takes a couple of orders. I then take group 2 orders to move this Flash Pulse bot onto this position and toss a Discover on Usha. My hope is that she will then be revealed, which would let me take these guys and run them up and kill Usha. Sadly, the Flash Pulse bot does not succeed the Discover, but it stays there in an annoying ARO position in case Usha tries to move. With my remaining orders, I consider running out to try to push this button and try to push this button, but I just don't have that many. So instead, I camp out defensively. And that ends up looking like this. I've got Phoenix on here, seeing everything. Ajax is prone, but he's on the edge, so he has good line of fire. Machaon is present there. He actually can see this corner, which means that I can take pot shots if the bear starts moving. I've got a Myrmidon here so that I can nanopulsar any bears that come running through here. And of course, given that everyone's on top of buildings, it will be that much more order intensive for any bears to get into CC if that's what they want to do. I have this flashbulb spot watching Usha. I have Oideros up here. I'm pretty happy with his defensive position. He can see this line, he can see this line, and also he's watching Usha. Not only that, but Oideros has Eclipse Grenades and Mimetism -6. So if the Unknown Ranger decides to shoot at him, I've got a good chance of face-to-facing things, and if I do lose the face-to-face, I probably won't go unconscious. I can instead just take a wound and fail guts to safety, back here or something like that. The Myrmidon Officer, likewise, is thinking the same things. I think he does not have line of fire down this way. I don't really remember, but he's definitely watching for Usha, and he's definitely got those Eclipse Grenades of his own. At this point, I do realize that Van Zant might be coming, so I've taken Pandora and Akmon and done my best to watch, the entirety of my deployment zone. As such, I then have the Warcore and Flashbulb Spot. They're in the same position, and that's pretty much that. As I said in the null deployment video, I consider this to be an extremely aggressive ARO position. A whole ton of guys are on very active ARO, by which I mean they are standing there in positions where they could shoot the enemy, or as the case may be, throw smoke against the enemy if that enemy walks around the corner. The name of the game here is to tax my opponent and to force awkward trades. If Usha wants to come out and push this button, then she is going to get discovered, hopefully by this flashbulb spot, and then killed by Oideros and the Myrmidon Officer if she does anything. If the Bear Pods try to run around this corner or run around this corner, they're going to have to deal with Phoenix or Machaon or Ajax as they do it. If the Unknown Ranger wants to run up and try to get some work done, he will have targets to shoot at, but these targets are highly unlikely to be the sorts of things that he'll kill in one order. Active ARO is all about taxing your opponent as they try to advance, and then sandbagging as hard as you can, stalling basically as hard as you can once they do get to start shooting at things. And in my opinion, this works out really well for me. I don't remember the exact order of operations, but basically what happens is the Impetuous Bear runs up here, throwing some smoke in order to help the Unknown Ranger advance. The Unknown Ranger runs up to this position, forces the Lambent Flashbulb Spot to fail guts to safety, but doesn't kill it. That's a little lucky for me, but it's not too crazy considering the Unknown Ranger's only burst 4. He takes a gunfight with Oideros, hoping to clear the way for Usha, but I don't think he makes any progress in that. I think the Unknown Ranger is not able to force Oideros to back off. He debates whether he wants to have a face-to-face between the Unknown Ranger, who's standing right here, and Phoenix, who's standing right there, and he decides not to for a couple of reasons. First, the Unknown Ranger would get splashed, and that splash would definitely hit the mine that I've drawn over, and it might also have hit the bear, depending on how close they're standing. Second, he just does not know whether we're within 24 inches. If we're within 24 inches, it's going to be burst 4 on 10s for the Unknown Ranger versus burst 2 on 11s versus Phoenix. Not great odds, but not terrible. If he's outside of that range, though, he's going to be on, 4s, and I'm going to be on 11s, and that's going to be really bad for him. Moreover, if the Unknown Ranger gets unlucky, it's not unreasonable that he just burns and dies. A damage 14 flaming template is very dangerous, and I think Jmustang rightly does not want to, mess with that. What he does instead is have his Paracommando come on. The Paracommando, runs up to here. I don't think he actually leaves the room. Shoots at Ajax, puts a wound on him, thinks about shooting at Machaon, decides better of it, and then runs back to a defensive position. After that, not much happens. The Unknown Ranger runs back to here. I'll get you a better picture later. And I think this Metro runs out, pushes that button, and then maybe runs to safety. I don't remember exactly what he does, but he does push the button. Here is a picture of when he is thinking about using the Unknown Ranger to gunfight things from this position. So yeah, that does look like the bear would get splashed. And it does look like Oideros was forced to back off. So I guess that does happen. At the end, things look like this. I still can't see the Metro. Maybe it's right here. But as you can see, this button was pushed and there was nothing in it. Ajax has taken a wound and failed guts to the center of the room here. You can't see him, but the Unknown Ranger is on the other side of this building. There's still a bear over here. And otherwise, that's pretty much that. The last noteworthy thing, my opponent has not gotten a chance to take Usha from here to push this button. I think he pushed this button with the Unknown Ranger, but because this button isn't pushed, I will not have lost the chance to get 2 points myself. The game round ends, and both the Unknown Ranger over here and Machaon over here are dominating quadrants, so we each get a point. Here's another picture. You can see the Unknown Ranger just barely in that quadrant, as far away as he possibly can get while still being in the quadrant. And what we're seeing here is something I'd forgotten about, which is the Scots Guard. The Scots Guard moved up and went into suppressive fire. That actually turns out to be kind of annoying for me. I won't try to deal with that on my turn. Using this picture, I can then talk about my plan. It's turn 2, most of the buttons are pushed, and I've got to make a play for the win. In my opinion, if I can kill the Unknown Ranger, then I've got his Master Breacher. If I can then set up defensively in this position, I will hopefully be able to stave off the bear and thereby win the game. I have my full 10 orders now because I haven't lost anyone. And while I'll have to spend some orders getting off of this building, there's no air row for me to deal with, and I'm actually further up the field than when I started, which was, as you recall, back there. Thus, I slowly but surely decide to walk from this position, run all the way over here to push a button, throw some smoke to stop I think this was to stop the annoying Scots Guard, run over here to kill Usha, run over here to threaten the bear, run over here to put Ajax into face-to-face with the Unknown Ranger, and then this is right before Ajax berserks the Unknown Ranger to death. The first thing I did is actually run him around the corner and put 3 nanopulsars on top of him. The Unknown Ranger had decided to take a pot shot with his AP Spitfire, which put a wound on Ajax. In exchange, despite his BTS of 0, the Unknown Ranger only took 1 wound in the process. I'm low on orders now, so I decide to berserk Ajax into the Unknown Ranger. He actually passes 2 of the 3 damage 18 saves, so he actually almost survives getting berserked, but he doesn't survive, he dies. Ajax, for his part, fails his save against the T2 CCW and himself dies. I believe I took this picture after I had spent the order for Ajax, by the way, so I do still have 2 orders to position, I think. Not shown in this picture is the fact that Phoenix accidentally tripped this mine and took a wound, and that I managed to put the bear pod into NWI or Dogged or whatever it is with, I think, nanopulsars. Thus, things are looking pretty good at the end of my turn, and it's all about getting into a defensive position to weather his counteroffensive. With 1 bear dead, the Unknown Ranger gone, and a lot of orders missing besides, I do think that I've got a pretty good chance of success. But I still need to be quite aggressive with my defenses because I'm standing awful close to a lot of dangerous things like chain rifles. Meanwhile, I've used the Tactical Awareness order on Akbon to stand up Oideros and move the team into a more defensive, well, I guess more aggressive defensive position. Finally, and this is mostly on a lark, I somehow at some point in time put the Lamed Flash Pulse bot up here. I think that was part of the process of discovering Usha, which I think on the second attempt maybe was successful. I don't remember exactly, but Usha does get killed and the Lamed does end up here. The last thing I do is put my Lamed up here, I think on a lark. I think I was moved discovering Usha, which might have succeeded. I tried like twice and succeeded, so that was a little bit lucky. But I do basically put the Flash Pulse bot up here on a lark to be more defensive. And this pays off big time. Because, you see, looking at this position, my opponent knows that he needs to kill Machaon if he wants to win. And he does have pieces nearby that can do it. He has a Volunteer over there, he has a Liberto in this position, and he has enough orders that those guys can potentially do some stuff. Problematically, if the Volunteer, who I think started here, stands up, the Lamed Flash Pulse bot would see him over the top of this building. It's simply not that tall. So it costs him just a few extra orders moving slowly around this corner. What he does is he gets around this corner and then starts dumping chain rifles on my guys. I pretty much have no choice but to dodge because I don't want to lose Phoenix. And unfortunately, Machaon, I think, fails a dodge and takes a wound through that process. So things are looking pretty risky for me. However, in order to get to this position, he does get seen by this flash pulse and then gets stunned. Being stunned is absolutely huge because it cost him the entirety of the offensive run. Note that at some point during the process, Phoenix had dodged upstairs. He dodged upstairs, the chasseur ran over at him and shot him or flamethrowed him or something, and then I realized my mistake and he dodged back downstairs. After that, the Liberto runs over to here. I don't exactly remember why he was revealed, but suffice to say that he was revealed at this point. He then, I think, runs around here to try to take some shotgun shots at Phoenix or maybe the Myrmidon. I don't remember. And if memory serves, he does kill Phoenix. But in the process, he is also stunned by the Flash Pulse bot. So both of these two attackers have made successful attacks that have done damage to me, and he still has orders which he could use to follow up. But because they've been stunned, that option is no longer available. In full fairness, we do realize at the end of the game that my opponent had miscounted his orders at the start of his turn 2, and so he should have had one more order in each of his two groups. But I think we also remarked that because all of his attack pieces are stunned, there isn't much he could have done with that. So I think my opponent was correct in deciding that these attacks were ones he had to make, and he almost succeeded, which, in my opinion, justifies why I've been so scared about getting close to him throughout this entire game. But while it was a good attempt, Hero Flashpulse Butt managed to stem the tide of angry Atex and let me survive the turn. I lose Phoenix, but otherwise things are pretty good. Going into my turn 3, I realize that I have not broken the back of his army and probably won't get a chance to do so. However, one of the HVTs has been revealed to be there, the other HVT has been revealed to be there, and this is the side of the board that my troopers are on. All I have to do is take my fully intact second Anomatarchos, run up to this position, kill this guy, kill this guy, kill this guy, and then stall during his turn 3 for the win. And that's pretty much exactly what I do. Orderos leads the way, he runs up to this position. I think the Myrmidon officer is the one that manages to shoot the chasseur point blank with the shotgun. He gets a flamethrower for his troubles, but I think I just tank the flamethrower save or something like that, and the chasseur dies. Maybe I take a wound, I don't remember. Meanwhile, Orderos does throw some smoke on the Scots Guard. I do shoot the Scots Guard and just can't hit him because of his mimetism and armor, so I throw the smoke on there and then run up and cut his head off. At this point, I do still have a few orders left, and as I make this battle report, it might have been a good time for me to try to take Pandora and actually spotlight his line Kazakh. If I can put him into Lost Lieutenant, I am in an A-OK safe defensive position. But I don't think of it at that time, and so instead I just go on Arrow. This is obviously not the final position. I think Orderos ends up there, Akmon ends up there, and Pandora ends up here. I'm trying to put as much Arrow on this corner as I can, because if the bear comes trundling out, I want to be able to kill it. This ends up putting a lot of weight on Orderos, which I think is fine, he's a tough cookie, but my opponent also realizes that. After putting everybody except the Bearpode controller into Group 2, he spends one order running the Bearpode controller out to here, forcing Orderos to dodge, and then he shoots poor Orderos. He manages to hit with one of them, crit with the other, Orderos fails 2 saves and is knocked unconscious. The only good thing that came out of this is that Pandora manages to dodge from this position to this position. And in many ways, that's where I should have put her in the first place. Pandora is by far the most impressive and important arrow piece that I can have because she has viral pistols. Even a single hit from those viral pistols will force my opponent's bear to make 2 saves on BTS, and if he is put into the dogged state by those 2 saves, then he will go straight to dead because he does not have shock immunity if I counter that shock immunity with viral ammo. So Pandora being in this position essentially creates a threat that my opponent cannot afford to tussle with. This threat ends up being game-winningly good. What happens is that rather than take the Bearpode and run this way, which would be short and sweet, he instead has to spend all of his orders running all the way around here. For his part, he manages to get here with I think 2 orders to spare, but he has to use one of those orders throwing smoke, and the second order he spends running out being in zone of control of HVT number 1 and HVT number 2. Using this picture, when the game ends, his Bearpode is out of orders standing right here. He is thus threatening HVT number 1, he threatens HVT number 2, and that gets him 2 points. On the other hand, I dominate both quadrants with the HVTs, so I get 4 points, and Machaon, my data tracker, is alive, which gets me another point. That does get me the win, but it's a lot closer than you might otherwise think. Despite the fact that I have killed almost everything in his army, he is only 1 or 2 orders away when he gets to this position from killing, say, this Myrmidon officer or Machaon up here and totally skewing the course of the game. Kill the Myrmidon officer and he dominates this quadrant, and I'm not threatening this HVT, which would potentially be a 4-point swing. Kill Machaon, and not only am I out my Master Breacher domination points at the end of the round, if he can somehow manage to steal this quadrant from me, I would lose the fact that I'm threatening the HVT with my Master Breacher. Thus, while I do believe that my victory was fairly comfortable going into my opponent's turn 3, it's not hard to imagine that with just a handful more orders, or with a handful more luck, or with a handful more, I don't know, things could have been very different for me. This is exactly what I mean when I say that the last turn of the game has a lot of power, and it's because the last turn has so much power that when you're going first, you really have to treat this as a kill mission. In that sense, I don't think Cryogenics is terribly different from missions like Acquisition, or Quadrant Control, or any of the other Go Second missions. All that being said, I am able to get the win here. I set up a rock-solid defense at the end of my first turn. My second turn, I scored a crucial kill on the Unknown Ranger and defended myself well, thanks in part to a Hero Flashpulse bot. And on turn 3, I was aggressive enough with my ARO that my opponent, despite the huge advantages that you have from going second, simply wasn't able to do much other than get some points for himself at the end. For Jmustang's part, he had a very defensive, really good null deployment. And while his first turn attack bounced off of my turn 1 defenses, and that put him in a little bit more exposed position, which I was able to punish, the fact is that even though I punished him really, really hard, he was still able to come up with credible threats that attacked me. All those bears, all those mines, all those chain rifles ended up being really dangerous. And when you're going second on a mission like Cryogenics as Ariadna, using those chain rifles and shotguns and bears as a close range threat is exactly what you should be doing. All told, I thought this was a really good game. I thought it showcased the relative advantages of null deployment and active ARO. And, well, I felt like I had a pretty solid handle on the situation at all parts during the game. The fact is that if that handle had slipped for even a moment, Jmustang would have used that gap to shove in the knife or the bear, and that would have been the story of this game. So it was a well-played game that I was really happy to get to play, which hopefully has turned into an interesting battle report. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you around.